The downfall of Theresa May, the Prime Minister broken by Brexit. Bloomberg at 10:11 a.m., a devastated Theresa May walked back in through the black door of number 10 Downing Street with tears in her eyes. Once inside, she thanked her staff who welcomed her back with applause and then found her husband, Philip. The couple went through. For May, 62, it was the end she had dreaded but could no longer avoid. After the impossible, Theresa May announces her resignation outside number 10 Downing Street on May 24. As Philip, her closest confidant and most important advisor, comforted May in her moment of distress, none of the aides or officials gathered inside number 10 wanted to disturb them. In truth, they had known a day earlier that there was no hope left, and the Prime Minister famous for her would have to resign. This article charts the final chapter of May's undoing. Based on conversers, ministers, officials, and others who asked not to be named, it reveals how a cabinet in disarray over Brexit policy finally came together to oppose the Prime Minister's last desperate plan. The walls began to close in around the British Prime Minister almost exactly a week earlier. At 10:39, unless she could get her deal past a vote in the Commons, Britain would have to choose between leaving the EU in October to cushion the impact on businesses, or cancelling Brexit altogether. But Corbyn ran out of patience. The negotiations, more than 30 ministers have quit or been fired from May's administration. Many resigned and, once Corbyn pulled the plug on the talks, May was in desperate trouble. Her team spent most of the work had been done by Monday night. But May had one match. She called a meeting of her most senior ministers for Tuesday, to thrash out how the government would respond to the collapse of the cross-party talks. For ministers in May's cabinet, Tuesday mornings usually begin with bacon rolls inside. The Premier has made, in sober tones, May talk through the options with her ministers. One idea stopped. Eurosceptic ministers such as Andrea Leadsom, Chris Grayling, and Michael Gove were horrified when May suggested leaving it up to individual MPs to decide in a free vote whether to support another plebiscite or not. May was proposing to pro-Brexit ministers gathered around the coffin-shaped cabinet table. This was madness. It would be seen as a Tory chairman Brandon Lewis was the last to speak. He told the meeting, "It was just insane," one person familiar with the discussion said in the hours afterwards. Even pro-EU, when the meeting broke up, the Brexiters believed they had carried the day and that May had accepted she could not push ahead with the referendum option, or the customs union that Labour had asked for. 3.5 hours, in a speech at PwC's officers near the Thames embankment, a short walk away, May promised Parliament a vote on whether to call a referendum to ratify the terms of the deal. At first, some pro-Brexit Tories believed the Premier had made a mistake. The speech was written, but for Steve Barclay, May's Brexit secretary, confirmation of his worst fears came later that night. He received a copy. In the hours that followed, other ministers were called into a private government reading room to be shown the legal text of the draft law. One by one they Leadsom, 56, convened a meeting of her concerned colleagues in her ornate private office behind the Speaker's chair in Parliament. From about 11, it wasn't the first time Leadsom had led the revolt. The meetings ran on beyond midday as ministers discussed whether they should all resign at once. That made Leadsom. Rumours swirled around Westminster that May was about to make a statement. Some believed Meanwhile, deep inside Parliament, the secretive leaders of the Conservatives' 1922 committee met to discuss ways to force May out. They summoned her chief. At just after 7 p.m, Leadsom picked up her mobile phone and rang May. The pair spoke for I do not believe that we will be a truly sovereign United Kingdom through the deal that is now proposed, Leadsom wrote. I have always maintained. The sun shone Thursday morning when voters across the UK. In the European Parliament, May knew by then that she would have to go. There was no way. She travelled with her husband to vote in Sonning, the affluent village west of London where they live. Frank conversation. On Friday morning May first met Lewis, the party chairman, and then Graham Brady, the chair of the 1922 committee, who was representing Tory MPs. She told them of when May stepped outside to make her resignation statement just after 10 a.m., some in her team were already on the brink of tears. By the time I have done my best, she said. I will shortly leave, with assistance from Jessica Shan Clement and Kitty Donaldson. To contact the reporters on this story, Tim Ross in London at tross54@bloomberg.net. Alex Morales. To contact the editors responsible for this story, Flavia Kraus-Jackson at jackson@bloomberg.net, Emma Ross Thomas, Robert Jameson. For more articles like this, please visit us at Copyright 2019 Bloomberg LP.
Raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.